Okay, Sean, how are you, my friend?
Good, Mark. Good to see you again. Good to be here. Excited for the discussion today.
And how's life at Newlab today?
Chaotic as always. Yeah, other than the weather changes around the building, but everything else stays pretty frenetic and energetic internally. So we're excited.
Well, I'm sure our audience is equally excited to have you grace our presence and excited to hear about so many things you're doing. But really, the focus of today's podcast is on your activities with Ford, Detroit slash Google, and what you're doing in the mobility space. But this is just one vertical amongst a few verticals that you're concentrating on. But I feel very fortunate to have you share with us what's happening in that area. It's so vitally important on many levels. And I'll just say, mobility as we know it is being transformed before our very eyes. So we're very fortunate to have a futurist in Sean Stewart to share what's happening from the ground. So looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark.
I'm going to ask Jerry to just go to the next slide so we can get started. So as everybody knows, this is intended to be educational. We're not giving financial advice, and this disclaimer basically says that. So if you feel in some way, shape, or form you did get financial advice, talk to your financial advisor. This is purely intending to be educational in nature. So just putting it out there. Jerry, if you'd be kind enough to go to the next slide. Okay, so I'll basically say a couple quick words about myself. Most people, if you've been on our podcast previously, you know the Mark Young story, but I am one of the two co-founders of Bridgepoint Capital. Previously, I was a partner with another private equity firm called L. Catterton. And prior to that, I ran the global private wealth practice for McKinsey Investment Office. So those are three highlights of my career. And at Bridgepoint Capital, we have three lines of business. We primarily do investments in breakthrough technologies that are done on a per deal or SPV basis. And we're all about adding value after we invest. We call it value post-close. So we're very focused on how we can add value once we write the check. So that's a very brief highlight of me and Bridgepoint. And I'd love Sean to tell us the Sean Stewart story.
Appreciate it, Mark. I'm Sean Stewart. I'm the CEO here at Newlab, and I joined just over 4 years ago, 4 years and 2 months. My career is kind of broken down into two different sections, about 15 years in early stage ventures in the travel space. So Expedia just after 2001 for about a decade. Then I helped build a company called JetSetter here in New York that was acquired by TripAdvisor. And after that, spent a couple of years at Airbnb in 2014. And from there, my time in the travel space ended, and I moved closer to the frontier technology space that I work in today. I joined Google X in 2016 and helped develop Waymo, Google's self-driving car and trucking company. I was the chief business officer there for a couple of years. And then more recently returned here to New York, to the Brooklyn Navy Yard to help build and scale Newlab, which is a center of invention in the Navy Yard, and soon to be expanding to Detroit as well, which is what we're here to talk about today. So thanks for having me.
That's my pleasure. And we're very excited to basically be here for the unveiling of Newlab Detroit, if I can call it that. But in any event, obviously you're the CEO of Newlab. Jerry, I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide if you would, because so kind. So Sean, tell us, this is a photograph, maybe start at a high level, what this is, what's happening with Detroit and Ford Motor Company, but just try to initially keep it at a high level, if you don't mind, just so we can see what's happening.
Yeah, you bet. So Detroit has a neighborhood called Corktown, which is the oldest neighborhood and area of Detroit. And one of the two major buildings that exist in the Corktown area are the train station that you see there in front of you. This is a train station developed and launched by the same people who actually built Grand Central Station and designed Grand Central Station here in New York City. But Detroit's main central station actually closed in 1991. And you can see just that building to the right of it, if you're looking at your screen, is the book depository. And that's an Albert Kahn designed building. Albert Kahn worked very closely with the Ford family, designing a lot of the Ford real estate. And he built this as a book depository for the state's public school academic texts and where they were stored. The train station actually closed in '91. And since then has been, for both local residents and for people around the world, has been a sign of Detroit's decline and challenges through those periods. This kind of beautiful piece of architecture was inactive up until recently. And the recent change is that Bill Ford and the Ford Motor Company decided to acquire the land and these two major pieces of real estate in an effort to revitalize the Corktown area of Detroit, bring activity back to it. And their vision was to develop an innovation campus, which they named Michigan Central. And this innovation campus is focused on developing, testing, and deploying the next generations of technologies, products, and solutions relevant to the movement of people and goods. So I can stop there to make sure that kind of helped. But that's the first seed of this partnership, is a commitment, a pretty significant one, from Ford Motor Company to develop the Michigan Central Innovation Campus, to revitalize and bring back activity, attract entrepreneurs from around the world to build, test, and scale their technology in Michigan, but also partner with a range of corporate clients that will be also based on the campus. And so if you divide the two buildings, the book depository is one, the central station is the other. The station, in addition to having everything from food and beverage, accommodations, will be the home of dozens of corporations that are key to the mobility space and the mobility industry overall. In the book depository, the Albert Kahn building, that's a 280,000 square foot facility. That's where we've worked with Ford and the Michigan Central team to design a Newlab, a four-story building with everything from labs and equipment that they need to develop their technology, through to the conference rooms, event space, and everything else necessary to build and help scale early stage ventures in the mobility space. And then what we're using is our innovation studio model to bring together these two ecosystems and sets of partners. Bring the corporations, which have their challenges, inefficiencies, and threats that they're looking towards advanced technologies and early stage product to potentially solve. And the community of startups from around the world that will be testing and developing new solutions to these problems that the corporate problem owners can help deliver and test. And so it's building an ecosystem specific to mobility that shows a lot of similarities to what we've done in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where the Brooklyn Navy Yard was wider, more of a Noah's Ark kind of approach, where we had technology focuses across every area that we were excited by. The Detroit campus is exclusively focused on mobility, and we're really excited for the progress there.
Sean, I could ask you a million questions, but I'll start with a very simple one. The corporate innovation and the partnering that you've been successfully deploying currently in Newlab, how did this opportunity with Ford Motor Company and what is now, an amazing building, amazing opportunity, an exciting situation, how did this happen? They didn't just wake up one day and give you a phone call and say, we're going to spend $900 million in Detroit. We want you to help us. So maybe you give us a little more detail.
Yeah, you bet. So Ford teamed up with Silicon Foundry many years ago to help them design the use case for this campus, like what would be the best way to activate this parcel of land and these key pieces of architectural history for the city of Detroit. And so Silicon Foundry and the Ford Michigan Central team actually came and visited Newlab. Liz Keene at the time, who was a key leader at Silicon Foundry, she's now the chief business officer here at Newlab. But she brought the Ford and Michigan Central teams to Newlab originally as an example in the Brooklyn Navy Yard of what could be done in Detroit. Not that it was bring Newlab to Detroit, but it was, here is what's happened in a similar campus, the 300-acre campus of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and how Newlab, in partnership with the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation, had revitalized this area that was inactive for some period of time, and how we brought job growth, venture creation, and overall economic activity to the neighborhood surrounding the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And so at first we were just a sample or a signal, like something to consider as they expand their thinking across this campus. And the more they learned about what Newlab had done in partnership with the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation and various entities from the public space in New York, they wanted us to kind of be more involved, less just an example of what was possible, but more a partner to contribute to the vision and planning of it. So we joined them almost as consultants to help develop the vision, the strategy, give our guidance of what we've learned about developing these kind of innovation districts and campuses and how to build activity and build the right programming between the partnerships and different stakeholder groups. And then by the time that vision started to come to reality, both sides, both Ford, Michigan Central, and Newlab wanted to be closely involved. And so Newlab wanted to actually develop a management agreement where we could participate and be a part of this exciting platform that's being developed. We travel around the world looking at innovation districts and innovation campuses. There's Mind outside of Milan, and there's lots of these Station F in Paris. What Michigan Central has developed and the vision of it overall is the most unique and ambitious innovation campus in the world. And with its exclusive focus on the movement of people and goods in the mobility space, this really is one of a kind in regards to its approach to tackling major industry challenges and systemic issues that require the participation of all players to make progress. The challenges we tackle with our innovation studios are not things that can be just solved by Ford Motor Company. They require community and government involvement, academic involvement, startup and early stage technology involvement. And so this campus is a nod to that future state of open innovation. And it's no small matter that Ford's name is not on it. It's Michigan Central. It's not called the Ford Innovation Campus. And intentional decision by Ford to make this an open and shared platform for innovation for the mobility ecosystem globally, versus just an asset developed for Ford's initiatives or focus areas.
You mentioned Ford, and I was going to ask this question later, but I'll ask it now because we're talking about sponsorship and partnership and at the Innovation Center. So I know Google has a hand in this effort as well. I don't know what you want to share with the audience regarding Google's participation and what their role would be, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so that vision with the Grand Central Station housing all of these different corporations that play a role in the mobility ecosystem included the announcement at the time by the governor, actually, that Ford and Google was one of the first partners to join this overall campus and mission. And their focus actually is going to be on the training and development of talent in the city and state. So they're developing a range of different programs, essentially academic approaches to training and developing the next generation of engineers that can take on important roles in the mobility space. So you're already adding to the campus the workforce development side of it, everything from students to retraining of people with new skill sets, and Google is going to play a key role in that, which we're very excited by. And then it's also fantastic to have Google at the table as they witness the innovation studio work and can participate actually as a stakeholder or problem owner. And so that is just the first of many corporations you'd expect to see taking space on this campus, participating in the programming, contributing to the overall ecosystem, and also bringing their problem sets to the table so that we can bring the right programming to solve them.
Well, I guess another thought I'd love to hear your comment on. I've been informed that Newlab at the Brooklyn Naval Yard today can point to approximately 10% of the tech jobs in Brooklyn today that trace their roots back to Newlab. I don't know if that's an accurate data point or not, but any thoughts on that? Because clearly what you're doing with Michigan Central can and should have a similar result.
Yeah, that's the statistic that actually comes from the Center for Urban Futures, which looked at from 2008 to 2018. Brooklyn grew from about 11th in tech-enabled startups that were fundraising or raised capital to number 2 in the country, just behind San Francisco. And so that growth was from about 200 startups in 2008 to about just shy of 1,200 startups in the Brooklyn area that were raising capital and were defined as tech-enabled. And of that 900 growth, there was about just over 104, I believe, that were Newlab members, so part of this ecosystem, so about 10.9%. But the key, whether the stat, whether it's 10% or 5%, it just points to that overall engine of economic growth and job creation, which is these companies join us somewhere between the 2 and 50 employee set size, and they grow to that kind of count of about 50 to 60 employees. And typically that's the point where these companies want to create their own office environments, their own cultures. And so they actually move out of the Newlab ecosystem, but still develop a home here in the Navy Yard. If you look at Nanotronics, Kingdom Supercultures, Emoji, Tarform Motorcycles, these are all companies that occupy significant office space in and around the Navy Yard here in Brooklyn. But they started at Newlab as teams of 2 and 3 people, just with an idea, early stage fundraising. And so we are, in effect, we're the basement raising the kids, and eventually you move them out when they grow and see the level of success needed to survive outside of our community. And that's where this public-private kind of partnership is so crucial, is that it's not enough just for us to team up with Michigan Central and Ford Motor Company to develop this platform. You need to also work with the city and state so that as these companies scale and grow and depart from the Newlab community and facility, they can continue to succeed in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. So you need that handover. You need to work together with the different agencies, the Michigan EDC, MDOT, Eagle, whoever the right organizations, to make sure that that stickiness of the city doesn't end once they get to the 50 or 60 employee count and suddenly they want to head back to New York or to California or leave the country entirely. So this is one of those plays that takes all of the ecosystem to make it work. It's not just a one building initiative. It does require the entire city and state to get behind this overall approach to attracting new talent. One of them just got announced in Fast Company today, which is Velo Bikes is here. They develop electric bicycles. Typically have been manufactured, their bikes have been manufactured in China. And they just announced actually through a Fast Company article today that they are not only moving and building their engineering team now in Detroit instead of growing it here in New York, but they're also moving the production of their bicycles from China to actually bring it back to Detroit. That's one of 230 companies here in Brooklyn today, and one of 300 to 400 companies in mobility that will eventually occupy that building. But it's just an early, incredibly small sample point, data point of what this can do. It can attract early stage companies to bring their talent and growth and headcount to Detroit, but also move their manufacturing and move their overall production to the state of Michigan as well. And then as long as that city, state, and Newlab Michigan Central partnership works well, you can then also help that company grow and scale once they leave our building and leave the Michigan Central campus, because their success requires it.
Well, I have to, again, compliment you on the approach, the vision, and I like to use analogies like you start with an acorn that becomes an oak tree. And some of the companies you mentioned that started in Newlab Naval Yard have become oak trees. And the fact that they don't have to live in your basement, using your analogy, forever, they're not going to. So you have to acknowledge they're going to evolve and grow and foster that, assist that, as opposed to try to stymie it and try to capture it. And the reality that Ford chose not to put their name on this operation, I think, shows a lot of vision and creativity to also recognize that if they're the right partner, they'll get the right opportunities. And you need to have an open environment so that innovation can flourish.
Yeah, that's right. We certainly see kind of 3 key components. There's people, there's infrastructure, and there's capital. You can't obviously ignore the capital requirement and the funding that these entrepreneurs need. But our view is that you bring together people, which is everything from the community of like-minded entrepreneurs, technologists that can support each other, along with corporations and government bodies who are problem owners, who have the opportunities for improvement in their business and industry, that we can bring these new early stage technologies to actually pilot against those problem sets. So that's the people, the set of people that we rely on, the communities we develop. Then you have infrastructure, which is the type of technology we focus on quite often is hardware, is technology that needs to be developed in labs, where prototypes are built and developed, but also then tested in environments that look like the real world they're going to be deployed in, even if it's not ready to be deployed on public roads. And so one of the beauties in the Navy Yard is, as an example, is you can't test self-driving cars on the streets of New York City, but you can test and develop them in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So when MIT had to build and scale and test Optimus Ride, their self-driving car spin out, they developed and tested it here in the Navy Yard prior to being acquired by Magna, and actually moving the team out to Michigan as well. And so in Detroit, you have that same system being developed of people, which is the communities across these two major buildings, the key corporations in the mobility segment, key startups and early stage entrepreneurs, as well as you'd want to develop partnerships with the academic ecosystem. Ann Arbor, 300,000 students in Ann Arbor, but across much of Michigan, there's such a catalog of impressive educational establishments that you would also want to have them as part of that people and network that you utilize. Then the infrastructure side we talked about is those labs and proving grounds, the ability to build the technology, test the technology. The book depository will have an entire floor of labs and prototyping equipment for entrepreneurs to use on a daily basis. And then it also has the surrounding area where Mayor Duggan has developed essentially an innovation district around Michigan Central that makes it easier to deploy technology in the public environment, which is very exciting. And then the third is a key piece is capital, is that, you need to have vehicles that can ensure that capital is not what slows down the growth and success of these companies, or access to capital. And so that involves both partnering with investment funds or venture funds, and also offering up investment opportunities to investors that are focused on those thesis areas. And so we have our own fund that launches next year, New System Ventures, but we also syndicate much of the deal flow to private investors who take advantage of the companies being grown and developed in the Newlab ecosystem. So we're excited to continue to grow that same model of taking those three key components in the state of Michigan as well.
Well, you're not short on opportunity and excitement, I can promise you that. As far as, I'm sure some of the people on the call love everything you're saying and hearing, but you are a for-profit business and you're built to generate returns. Maybe without getting into any specific details, how do you, as the CEO of Newlab, monetize and benefit from what you're doing with the Michigan Central?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Newlab business essentially has on one side the revenue and profitability that is driven by the combination of revenue from the real estate side of the business, which are entrepreneurs that pay to have office space, offices, flexible access to our communities and our ecosystems. That typically is about 10 to 15% of the revenue performance of the company on an annual basis. And then you have our innovation studios, which make up the lion's share of our revenue. So that's the other 85%, which are us tackling challenges in materials, ability, and the energy transition, where we can take problem sets from government and corporate clients and source early stage technology that can solve those challenges. We then pilot them to prove out the technology is actually viable and can achieve the desired results. And then write case studies for our clients so they can make investment licensing or acquisition decisions based on the outcomes of what they witnessed in their innovation studio. And so those two components, the innovation studio product and the membership product, are what drive and grow the revenue of the business month to month, year to year, and drive its overall profitability. While on the other side, you have long-term value being created through carry, essentially, in the investment deals that this platform generates. So that could be carry on the SPVs through the private investors that we syndicate deal flow to, or carry on the funds that we partner with to get access to the deal flow. We just see that, especially in frontier technology, the amount of diligence necessary to validate that a company has promise and can reach its objectives and its potential requires a further in-depth analysis than what the average investment cycle looks like. You see VCs saying they spend 10 to 15 hours with a startup prior to making an investment decision. With the technology being developed in our ecosystems, you need to spend weeks and months. You need to test the technology in the real world, test it in its intended use cases and desired environments to then be able to see, can it deliver? testing quantum safe communication channels like Connect, the company here in Long Island City, you can't analyze that technology and know whether it's valid based on their pitch deck. You need to actually run experiments and pilots to see that it performs as expected. And so we feel that piloting system through the innovation studios gives us just incredibly valuable diligence into investment decisions that either are made through our syndicate of private investors or through our fund partnerships.
Well, that's a great answer. On the innovation that you're working with big corporates and your member companies and others to solve, vital needs of corporations today, what has been, I'll just say, the dropout rate, if I can use an analogy, of the corporations that have signed on to these programs? And are they re-upping? Are they expanding? Are they contracting? Give us a window on, I'll just say, the corporations and their satisfaction with what you're doing.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Certainly in this economic environment too, because you're starting to see corporations certainly consider every dollar of spend, and R&D and innovation in-house is certainly often a very big line item in budgets. And as they're looking towards potential recession and all the fun with the stock market, you are seeing companies consider the effectiveness and return on investment in their innovation budgets, R&D. And so the Newlab model, it requires, the innovation studio concept requires them to change their perspective on one incredibly important component, which is the ownership of IP. Is that most innovation, the Google X environment I came from, Lab 126 at Amazon, any of these innovation R&D systems in larger corporations, their strategy there is to hire the best talent you can, bring on the best people you can to tackle the problems that you see as worthy opportunities. But all the solutions, the technology developed, it's owned by that corporate entity, by the employer. While the model we use is that we view an open innovation platform. We don't want to replace that approach to innovation if you want to continue to spend in-house in that approach. Our view is that there's talent outside of your four walls that is venture capital funded, could be coming out of academia, could be early stage startups and technology being developed, but they are funded by something other than your own entity. They're not employed by you, but they are developing technology and product that is relevant to your industry. The S&P 500 for the first time since, 1960, the average age of an S&P 500 company, 4 years old. For the first time ever this year, it dropped below 20 years. The average age of an S&P 500 company now is 18 years old. And we view that as a signal that the technology and product developed outside of the corporations is what is disrupting the corporations and bringing in newer, younger entrances into the S&P 500. And so we built an open innovation platform that says you should test and understand all the technology and solutions being developed around the world, not just the ones you can fund and develop with your full-time team. And so the result of that has been two things, coming back to your question. One is that we've never had an innovation studio end. They renew and re-up because once we've found a solution to one problem, there's a close follower of a second and third problem that they want us to tackle next. And the second piece is it's become more popular in this economic environment because of its cost efficiency. If you're that you could run an innovation studio for, let's say, $1.5–2 million for a 12-month program to pilot, let's say, 10 solutions to a problem set. Most of our clients would argue that a $1.5 million budget is the equivalent of 3 to 4 full-time heads. If you look at base salary, bonus, equity, healthcare, office space, everything they pay for talent, you're essentially deciding, do you want to hire 4 to 5 new people on your team to solve these massive industry and corporate challenges? Or do you want to run a 12-month program that has 70 to 90 participants from 7 to 10 different early stage ventures developing and piloting solutions for you, where you don't own the IP, but you own the front row seat to that innovation to make decisions based on what you wish to license, invest, or acquire the solutions developed. And so we never claim we're a replacement to in-house R&D. I think companies will always want to develop their own IP, especially around sensitive and key areas. But we think we have found a complement to that innovation cycle that is incredibly cost efficient, has a high success rate, and can ensure that corporate and government agencies have access to the bleeding edge of technology and solutions at all times versus only having access to what they can build through their full-time staff.
I need to just emphasize a couple of things you just said, which I think are incredibly powerful. Firstly, you've never lost an innovative corporate partner, and that is a testimony to the effectiveness of what you're doing. So congratulations on that, on behalf of that. I think secondly, I'll just say the bang for the buck of what you're doing is just tremendous. If you have 4 internal people versus having 70 external people with 10 different companies trying to tackle a problem for a corporate, at some point, you know, the numbers start to be overwhelming, and the likelihood of having success through your model trumps the success of them doing inside. That's my opinion. And I will also share with you, having grown up in the pharma biotech world at the early stage of my career, there was a concept, we call it the NIH syndrome, which stood for not invented here. So biotech relies on big pharma to do R&D sponsorships and partnering. And early days, big pharma didn't want to share their R&D budgets and didn't acknowledge the talent that existed in biotech. And on some level, you're able to overcome and engineer around was the pushback of big pharma to biotech, which has now changed so that they embrace each other. But you having, I'll just say, overcome that objection is not trivial. That's a big deal. And the fact that you haven't lost any corporate partners is tremendous. And I think it's only momentum that's going to continue to rapidly grow. So how do you see Newlab capturing this pent-up demand? Because big corporates have to innovate. You just use the S&P 500 analogy that average corporate's now 18 years old. Yeah, they're being disrupted by technology, and you're at the forefront of all this stuff. So how do you see Newlab keeping up with the unmet needs that are in the market?
No, great question. And certainly you can see that evolution of this. The innovation studio model was originally a single client to Newlab to solve an issue, an industry, an opportunity that client has identified. The Michigan Central vision for that campus in Corktown is still the Newlab kind of program on one side, but instead of just a single corporation, Ford trying to solve curbside charging, Ford trying to accelerate electrified roadways, Ford trying to figure out the 50-foot challenge for package delivery through drones. Instead, you have a campus of corporations all motivated and all focused on the same industry. So it's actually, Michigan Central is 2.0, Newlab Detroit is 2.0, which is look at what we've been able to do with a single client model in a single campus where the corporations aren't present on our campus here in Brooklyn. The 300 acres doesn't house the corporations we work with. We work with LG and Orsted and Verizon. They're not based here. But imagine this 2.0 version in Detroit, which is actually exists in the building on the campus, all with an interest in the kind of systemic issues that are occurring in the mobility space, partnering them again through the innovation studio model with these large access to early stage technology and product through the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It just makes it even more powerful heading into this open innovation approach. And so when you look at some of the major things people are trying to do, carbon neutral their entire supply chain, clean the world's oceans, find renewable energy sources, none of these challenges really can be successfully completed with just a single entity, a single corporate, a single government department. You need these open innovation platforms that bring together the early research of academia, the early technology and product from startups, the problems and experience and industry knowledge of the large corporations, and the support and participation of government agencies and communities where appropriate. And our view is with all those stakeholders, you just have a successful model and an outcome and output that is far more likely to solve the challenge at hand.
Well, again, very well said, Sean. I'm going to bring it back to Ford for a second. Ford has invested a lot of time, money, and effort to help launch Michigan Central. what do you see success in their eyes? How would they define that this was a win for them? They're not a charity, so they obviously want commercial results. How do you think? What do you think their objectives are for Michigan Central?
Yeah, I think you have the mobility focus of it, and then you certainly have the socioeconomic or the economic development aspect of what's expected to happen in and around this neighborhood. And so they're not a nonprofit, but some of the motivation for Bill Ford and the Michigan Central leadership team and the Ford leadership is to contribute positively to revitalizing the Corktown district of Detroit. So despite being a for-profit entity, there's a lot of philanthropic motivation here. Is that I think Bill Ford said it well. He said Detroit has done a lot for Ford. Ford wants to do a lot for Detroit, and by giving this new life to this specific area of the city, the oldest neighborhood in the city, and to very important architecture, I think their first objective or outcome of success is activity, bringing thousands of people back to that neighborhood, putting thousands of people in those two buildings who come to work every day means that thousands of people need somewhere to get coffee, and thousands of people need somewhere to live, and thousands of people need transportation and parking, and thousands of people leave every day and want to go for happy hour or go to a concert or a gallery. And the hope is this is a spark that changes the neighborhood entirely and changes the overall offering of the Corktown area. And you've seen that in and around the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The Brooklyn Navy Yard's gone from a couple hundred employees to there are 18,000 employees across the 300 acres now. And because of that, they had to add ferry transportation to Midtown Manhattan. They had to add subway buses to take people to the subway stations. They had to add transportation in and around the Navy Yard. Wegmans grocery store in the neighborhood for the first time, a large national chain of grocery stores present here in this area. And all of that started with job growth, people. So the first piece is people, is that population and traffic that leads to the economic development in the area, creates more jobs. And I think that is at the foundation what Ford wants to achieve in Michigan Central. They could very easily have and then you get to the second motivation, which is they could very easily have achieved that by just making this a Ford office. Just tell thousands of Ford employees that they have to go there every day to sit at a desk. That would achieve a lot of the activity in the neighborhood and a lot of the economic development objectives. So the higher level objective on top of that overall economic development is the mobility industry and finding solutions and developing new technology and approaches to many of the significant challenges that the industry is facing. The energy transition that needs to occur in mobility, the supply chain challenges that the pandemic uncovered, the movement from all of the different transportation solutions we've seen in the past to everything from micro-mobility forms across larger ways to transport goods across the borders from the US to Canada. So the beauty is you have multiple layers of success here and impact. You have impact on the neighborhood, impact on the businesses, impact on the city of Detroit and the neighborhoods of Corktown. Then you have on top of it the development of solutions for the mobility industry with all of these key clients, corporations, and government bodies, where we could see greater success at tackling some of the major issues in mobility. Electric vehicle battery design is a challenge for everybody today. Electric vehicle batteries have so many issues. They're flammable, they don't have long lifetimes, it's hard to recycle them. That isn't a challenge that only Ford needs to solve. It's an industry challenge that they all need to tackle. And so if an innovation campus like Michigan Central can make significant progress on some of these major industry challenges through this model of open innovation that we've been able to design, that's an incredible outcome for Ford, for Michigan Central, for Newlab, and for the industry overall. So those are the two pieces we have to track: is, are we meeting the economic development potential of this campus and actually growing the city of Corktown, the area of Corktown, in a way that's necessary and that's clearly achievable? And also, are we having an impact in the mobility industry in the way that's expected, if that makes sense?
Well, I'll just say, as a citizen of the world, what you're trying to accomplish through mobility and, the reduction of the carbon footprint, the global warming, all these major challenges that we've all face as a society, and your approaches to tackling these things, I think it's a beautiful thing. I just have to say that. So Keep up the great work.
Appreciate it, Mike.
What would you're going to have a big announcement soon, but maybe for the people listening to this podcast, when will you unveil something that's been in the works for a while? Lots of money's been spent on it. The excitement is sky high. How do people track the announcements and the unveiling of this new innovation center?
Yeah, I mean, you're already starting to see a lot of the coverage now. So the first article about a company moving talent and production, both from New York and China into Detroit, occurred today through a Fast Company article. But I think you'll continue to see a pretty significant drumbeat of progress there until a soft opening in early 2023 of the building. Some of the first tenants are actually getting into the building earlier than that, but it's a cold winter in the Q1, and so we'll wait to unveil it and bring people into the space once it's a slightly more inviting climate in Detroit. So there's a ton of progress happening there. I think what I do is set up news alerts for Michigan Central as a phrase and Newlab Detroit, and that allows us to continue to be up to speed as people announce more and more progress at the Michigan Central campus. And then plan to visit. It is something that needs to be seen to be believed. Newlab here in Brooklyn, we can show photos and pitch decks as much as possible, but nothing has the impact of when people walk into this ecosystem in the Navy Yard and see it at play. There's a level of energy and activity that you feel in the building that no deck can ever convey. And Detroit is 4x the size of it. In the Newlab Detroit at Michigan Central is just an even more captivating space. It is a stunning building that David Belt and the teams involved have designed and developed with Michigan Central is going to be the crown jewel of Newlab for sure, and certainly I think a building that Detroit will be very proud of. So we're really excited for the momentum that will happen between now and an official opening. And there's a lot more to come, certainly from Newlab between now and then.
So when is the quote unquote official opening? I know you'll do the soft opening. People are coming in early. That's all beautiful. But what is the official ribbon cutting date for this center?
They announced the official opening date yet. There's some soft opening occurring this year, and then the official date will be announced early in 2023. But it is in the early months of the year. This is a project that's been worked on for many years. Ford started this early with the vision, and the Michigan Central team together planted this seed many years ago before Newlab was involved. So the beauty is that this is not something we're talking about that opens a decade from now. This is happening right now, and we're so excited for the progress. And it's creating, so Newlab has 80% of our work is typically in mobility, energy, and materials. And this has also helped to create a structure for us where we have physical centers of gravity for each of the themes we focus on. Our building 128 here in Brooklyn is where the majority of our energy work happens. Our energy studios, our energy startups, and product development testing is largely occurring here in Brooklyn. Our other area of focus is mobility, the movement of people and goods, and we'll now have a center of gravity in Detroit where the majority of activity will occur. And then our third focus is material, which the state had already announced funding for Newlab to develop a home focused on the material space, life sciences, but non-therapeutics. And so now we're working with the Navy Yard, the New York EDC, the Partnership Fund for New York, at developing a center of gravity for life sciences, cellular agriculture, work happening in redeveloping how the building blocks of society are developed. Leather is no longer raised through cattle, it's grown in labs. Proteins are being grown in lab environments. There's just a range of materials being developed now in very different ways than they were in the past. And we're excited to ensure Newlab has an ecosystem of players in that important area as well.
Well, again, it's really, really exciting. And I have to just say, I applaud all your efforts and just keep up the great work. I guess, if I may, I'm going to ask Jerry to go to the next slide. I think we've covered most of this, but I just want to make sure, Sean, if you have any other embellishments you'd like to make. But you talked about the three centers of gravity, so mobility, materials, and energy. And yeah, you will do things outside of those three core focuses. But anything you want to add to this, or you feel like you've already addressed this?
No, this is just a good, I appreciate throwing up the graphic, but it shows kind of how we operate the key components and the key focus areas of mobility, energy, and materials. The 20% is a really interesting area for us, so kind of we refer to it as the lab, which is where we get to test out new areas of focus for the future. So an example is we announced a partnership last month with Sorensen. They developed technology for the deaf and hearing impaired. And they came to us with a range of challenges and opportunities to improve the experience and quality of life of people with hearing issues. And so we're now running an innovation studio to source new technology and solutions from around the world across a range of challenges people with hearing impairments experience. And so that 12-month innovation studio will expose us to a new area that in theory you can develop the next theme around. That might show so much promise and excitement and potential solutions that you build a fourth area of focus. So it's mobility, energy, materials, and technology that assists with disabilities, or whatever that area of focus could be. So we don't kind of rest on these three areas of mobility, energy, and materials. We're constantly using 20% of our resources and time to test out and work in new verticals, new areas that we think are justified and appropriate, to see if they larger, higher investment focus areas of the future. We have an innovation studio in Uganda that works on emergency and refugee housing. As an example, it's not one of the key focuses. It's not materials, mobility, or energy. But if we find a ton of promise and success, we're able to have an impact across many of the issues in that category, then it may suggest we should double down and take more of a perspective in these areas.
You mentioned Uganda, so I'm going to ask you a different question, but Uruguay, you haven't really touched on at all. I don't know if you want to touch on that now or not, but that's just one of so many exciting things you guys are doing today.
Yeah, we early witnessed just a growing movement of entrepreneurial activity, obviously in Latin America, startups growing out of Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile. And so we got very excited in understanding how we could grow our activity in that part of the world. The more we looked at, when you want to succeed for Newlab, we need to have very active and committed government in regards to innovation and venture development and growth of these ecosystems. And you need an ecosystem of corporations, as well as academic and research institutions that can provide access to IP research, as well as great talent. And so as we looked at the region in South America, Uruguay just stood out. They had just launched their Test Uruguay branding, which was essentially attracting corporations from around the world to test new technology in Uruguay. It's a country of, I think, don't quote me, but only about 6 million people, yet its industry and structure is very similar to what exists in any larger country. It has its own docks, it has its own airports, it has its own cattle industry and paper pulp, and has all these different industries that are very attractive to test and develop new solutions to. They've also been very forward thinking in the energy transition. They're largely on renewable energy sources already, an objective that companies have set for 2030. Uruguay has already achieved. They're piloting hydrogen buses and other pieces of technology in the energy transition. So we took notice and started keeping an eye on what they were doing. And as we saw growing interest in our innovation studios from corporations in South America, working with Leonisa in Colombia, Globant in Argentina, Mercado Libre in Mexico, we started to focus and bring all that activity to Uruguay. We partnered with LATU and ANI, two of the scientific research bodies there. We teamed up with local government, a minister named Omar Paganini, who is the Minister of Industry, who was essentially our kind of champion in bringing Newlab to the region. And we've started by launching 2 or 3 studios and hiring a team of 6 or so people down in that part of the world, eventually with the hopes of creating a physical kind of real estate placement in Uruguay that would be the center of gravity for us in South America. And certainly as some of the other countries around Uruguay have had both political and economic instability, we've just seen that our bet and our kind of commitment to Uruguay has already paid out in many different ways. And so we're excited to continue to grow that activity overall in the region.
Well, again, I applaud everything you're doing. I think it's tremendous. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience. I think you've been extremely thorough and comprehensive. If there are no questions, that's totally fine, but I'll just give the audience 1 minute in the comment section. If you have a question, feel free to ask it now. If you don't have any questions now, you can email us later. But we do have one more slide after this, which I'll touch on briefly as well. But if anyone wants to ask Sean anything, this would be your chance. Okay, I'll take that as a no, Sean. Again, phenomenal presentation. I'll ask Jerry to go to the next slide because I did want to make one other announcement, if I may. Okay, this slide should look familiar to people, but what's different is there's a tax planning item on the list and it's got a red box on it. So why did we put the red box on it? What am I about to announce? Basically, we had at Bridgepoint a meeting with our CPA yesterday for end of year tax planning purposes. And this is something that everybody should do. And I emphasize everybody. But this is also something that I did for partners at McKinsey when I oversaw the global private wealth effort for McKinsey. So where I'm going with this, simple things that can have meaningful impact on reducing your tax burden are things like making sure you captured all your deductions correctly. So that means things like tax loss harvesting of investments that are now below where you bought them. We call that below water or below the high mark. So things like tax loss harvesting, things like looking at your estimates of what you're going to have to pay for state income tax and deciding whether or not to pay that before end of year. Because if you do, you get to have a deduction from federal. So things like that are things you should definitely do. But I'm happy to announce that our CPA, a gentleman by the name of Kai Yu, will make himself available for people that want to spend a few minutes with a professional CPA and asking questions about year-end tax minimization strategies. So yes, we've used him for our efforts. Yes, I've done this previously. And yes, we're making this available for free if people want to take us up on this, because we believe in it so strongly, we want to share this. So that's the only item that I wanted to touch on, in addition to the amazing commentary by Sean. Jerry, if you don't mind, just go to the last slide. It just has contact information on it. Okay, so there's the two co-founders, myself, Mark Young, and Nadia Tien. If you want to reach out to us, you have our emails. We're delighted that you attended this podcast. We're here to share what we do. And clearly, what Newlab is doing is really breakthrough, really exciting. And we're proud to be an investor and a partner of Newlab and Sean Stewart as they continue to innovate and make dramatic improvements to areas that definitely need attention and help. So, Sean, as always, it's a pleasure. And I wish you and your family a very happy and healthy holiday season.
Thanks, you too, Mark. Thanks for having me, and thanks to the Bridgepoint team for hosting us. Really appreciate us being involved.
It's our pleasure. And everyone else that's on the podcast, have a happy holiday, and we will talk soon. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day.